It's that time of the week again. Time to talk about another lightsaber form. These past 2 weeks we've discussed Shicho and Mukashi, the earliest lightsaber combat forms and their principles of simplicity and precision respectively. This week we're tackling Form 3 or Surisu. This was by far the most defensive of the 7 forms, favoured by the likes of Obi-Wan Kenobi as well as Darth Xena. The basics of its grounding philosophy are fairly simple but quite interesting, so let's dive right in.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
As with Shicho and Mukashi, Surisu was a product of its time. During the 100-Year Darkness, Mukashi was the dominant form due to its usefulness in battle against Dark Jedi. After the war's end, however, the last of the Dark Jedi were banished from known space and Mukashi fell out of style. While incredibly effective in lightsaber combat, Form 2 just wasn't designed for anything else, poorly suited against blasters and large groups of enemies. But a shift back to Form 1 wouldn't cut it either. Shicho could handle large groups pretty well, though its broad sweeps just weren't practical for blaster deflection. Enter Surisu, or Form 3, which essentially took the parts of Form 1 that were effective for crowd control and combined them with Form 2's precision and economy of motion. The result was the ultimate defensive form. In the hands of a skilled Surisu practitioner, lightsabers became impregnable walls of energy that neither blasters nor other lightsabers could penetrate. It wasn't without weakness, however, especially since it didn't grant the user any true offensive capabilities. For the Jedi's usual peacekeeping duties though, this suited them fine. Yoda once told Luke Skywalker that Jedi use the Force for knowledge or defense, never attack. This principle was rarely adhered to by the old Jedi Order, however. For thousands of years, the Jedi stretched the definitions of defense and peacekeeping to the point where they were used as euphemisms for attack in some scenarios. This was a matter of practicality, as outright pacifism isn't too realistic when your job is to protect the galaxy, but there were still always some Jedi who were uncomfortable with how willing some of their comrades were with aggression. Surisu may have been developed, in part, as a reaction to the aggressive tactics the Jedi came to favour during the 100-Year Darkness, a counterweight to the offensive leanings of Mukashi. Surisu was the dominant form among Jedi when they weren't at war, overtaking every other style whenever the Sith retreated into the shadows. By the time of the Clone Wars, it was the most popular form among Jedi of all ranks, especially Jedi Consulars. Form 3 served its adherents well during the Clone Wars, keeping them and their troops safe from enemy fire on countless battlefields.
A defensive technique, but effective. Use it if you do not wish to be hit or if you are facing many opponents with blasters. With a lightsaber blade and enough skill in deflection, it is an excellent defense against blasters, but in other situations, it merely delays the inevitable.
Surisu was also known as the Resilience form or the Way of the Mynock, and its objectives were quite different from its predecessor, Mukashi. The aim of Surisu wasn't to win battles, but to survive them. Its users didn't even try to overcome their opponents much of the time, opting to outlast them instead. The efficiency of Form 3 meant that its practitioners could usually conserve their energy for far longer than their assailants, allowing them to wait their opponents out and make their move once they began to slip up. Once this happened, Surisu practitioners would either move to quickly disarm their attackers or talk them into surrender. Surisu involved constant and quick, but still easy, motion of the blade, maintaining a flow somewhat similar to the blade work of Shicho masters. Its goal was to leave as little of the body vulnerable as possible, and it accomplished this by eschewing a reliance on specific stances or maneuvers. Indeed, Surisu was less a set of moves, like Mukashi or especially Shicho, and more like an approach to combat, a form of constant defensive motion. Much like Mukashi, Surisu emphasized adaptability, especially when it conserved energy. Typically, Surisu practitioners only blocked what they had to and would often dodge bolts or strikes if possible as a way to save energy. Surisu masters, however, could create such a perfect defensive barrier that this was unnecessary and could fight without moving anything but their arms. To quote the Revenge of the Sith novelization, Kenobi met every one of Dooku's thrusts without so much as moving his feet, staying perfectly centered, perfectly balanced, blade never moving a millimeter more than necessary, deflecting without effort, riposting with flickering strikes and stabs swifter than the tongue of a Garolian ghost viper. More so than forms 1 and 2, Surisu relied on the Force. That innate foresight the Force gave its users, that instinct that told Jedi what would happen in the next 5 seconds, was what made the unyielding defense of Form 3 possible. Surisu could be imitated by non-Force sensitives. General Grievous, for example, used computers fused with his brain to think and move extremely quickly while analyzing the attack styles of his enemies, allowing him to predict and block their strikes. But this way was only imitation. True Surisu required foresight and the inner power granted by the Force. Surisu wasn't limited to use by the Jedi. Darth Xana, for example, favored the form as well, as she was too much of a lightweight, physically speaking, to make proper use of more aggressive forms. However, only the Jedi who let the Force take over and guide them in battle could unleash its true potential. To again quote Revenge of the Sith, the electro drivers powering Grievous's mechanical arms let each of the 4 attack thrice in a single second, integrated by combat algorithms in the biodroid's electronic network of peripheral processors. Each of the 12 strikes per second came from a different angle with different speeds and intensity, an unpredictably broken rhythm of slashes, chops and stabs, of which every single one could take Obi-Wan's life. Not one touched him. After all, he had often walked unscathed through hornet swarms of blaster fire, defended only by the Force's direction of his blade. Countering 12 blows per second was only difficult, not impossible. His blade wove an intricate web of angles and curves, never truly fast but always just fast enough. Each motion of his lightsaber subtly interfering with 3 or 4 or 8 of the general's strikes, the rest sizzling past him. His precise, minimal shifts of weight and stance slipping them by centimeters. Philosophically speaking, Surisu in the hands of a master could be seen as the Force itself shutting down a fight. Surisu masters let the Force take over and completely neutralize their opponent's attacks, turning the fight into a stalemate that only ended when the attacker accepted the futility of their actions. That was what defined the form, the refusal to start a fight and to weather battles instead of answering aggression with aggression. To practice Surisu was to exist in the eye of the storm, to be calm and unmoved by the turmoil of battle, even in the midst of it. In this sense, Surisu was essentially the embodiment of one of the cornerstones of Jedi philosophy, non-aggression. It's notable that, unlike most other lightsaber forms, Surisu didn't have any finishing moves. Form 3 had an opening salute, which Obi-Wan Kenobi was particularly fond of, but it completely lacked a means of ending a battle. This was not an oversight. While Surisu practitioners could and often did borrow disarming maneuvers from Shicho and Mukashi, the idea behind Surisu was to give Jedi an opportunity to end battles peacefully. This may not seem all that practical, but this approach worked often enough, especially in day-to-day fights with petty thugs. Of all the lightsaber forms, Surisu was easily the most Jedi-like. Form 3 taught that there wasn't such a thing as winning a fight, only surviving it, and the more combatants who survived, the better. Unless you're Darth Xana, of course, in which case it teaches you nothing and you simply use it as a defensive tool while you brew your Sith sorcery. But what do you think? Are you excited for us to discuss Form 4 next week? Free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you in next week's video.